Okay, good morning. So we are starting Taanit, Daf Beis. Mishnah tells us as follows: Me'emasai maskirin gvuras geshamim. So the Mishnah wants to know, same way if you remember from Maseches Brachos, we also had a Me'emasai current Shema Ba'arvin. How do you know that you have a duty to say the Shema at night? So the Mishnah is starting out the same way in Taanit. Me'emasai maskirin gvuras geshamim. How do you know that you have to be maskir the what we say is Mashav Ruach? We're going to explain in the Gemara why we call this Yuretz Geshamim. But how do you know that you have to say Mashav Ruach? When do you say Mashav Ruach? From where do we start saying it? So the Mishnah tells us, Rabbi Lezer Eimer, Miyantif Arishon Shel Chag, that the time that you start saying Mashav Ruach is from the beginning of Sukkot. Rabbi Shua Eimer, Rabbi Shua is the big bar plucked of Rabbi Lezer. Rabbi Shua says, Miyantif Achron Shel Chag. You don't say it on the beginning of Sukkot. You say it on Shmini Atzeres. You say it at the end of Sukkot. Amar Rabbi Shua, Hayil ve'en hageshamim el siman klala b'chag. The reason Rabbi Shua explains that we shouldn't say anything about Mashav Ruach in the beginning of Sukkot is because Mashav Ruach is going to, potentially bring the rain, or it's referencing rain, and rain on Sukkot is a siman klala. As we know, the Gemara tells us there that it's like essentially somebody came to his master, he's bringing him a cup of water, and when he's bringing the cup of water to drink, the master takes it and spills it on him. He says, "No, thank you." That's what it's like when on Sukkot, if there's rain, and we are essentially being rejected by the Rebbeinu Shalom. So Rabbi Shua says, doesn't make any sense. You're going to talk about Geshamim on Sukkot? It's a klala. So continues the Mishnah. Lama hu maskir. Yes, I'm Rabbi Shua Hayil ve'en hageshamim el siman klala b'chag. So lama hu maskir. So why would you mention it? Amar Rabbi Lezer, Afani le'amarti l'shoel elo lahaskir. Mashiv haruach umarid hageshem be'ayin nasai. So Rabbi Lezer says, I'm not telling you different. I didn't say we should daven for rain. I said we should mention it. We should mention it in the sense that that's the right time to mention it. You're right. To ask for rain, to have rain, it's a siman kala. Rabbi Lezer is not disagreeing. He's saying, but if just to mention it is not going to be a problem because we're asking the Rebbeinu Shalom to please, we're not beseeching him to please provide the rain. So Rabbi Shua says, okay, if you just want to mention it because it's the right time to talk about the Gevurah of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that he has the power to bring the rains. So Amar Lei, so Rabbi Shua says to him, why are you limiting the Haskara of Mashav Haruach to just the beginning of Sukkot? That's when you start. Why not say it all year round? What's the big benefit to start talking about on Sukkot? So so say it all the time. So Rabbi Lezer has to respond to that, and he says, so effectively, it's not that it's not the right time in America or in the Amazon, but fundamentally, Rabbi Lezer is saying this is the right time for the rains. It's going to be around now, so we're starting to say it now. And it's not the right time in Israel all the time for the rain, so that's why we're not saying it all the time. All right, now the Gemara is another halacha. Whoever goes up to daven on Shmini Atzeres, whoever's davening for the Amud then. So when do we talk about Mashav Ruach? Ha'acharon mazkir. Right, the second person is going to go up to daven by Musaf. That's what we're going to have. The mention of Geshem. That's what we're going to say Mashav Ruach. But Harishan ain't a maskir. We don't say Mashav Ruach in the Shachris, right? You don't say Mashav Ruach in the Shachris, only in the Musaf. And when by Pesach, so the reverse by Pesach. By Pesach, what do we see? The Yantiv Harishan shall Pesach, Harishan maskir, Ha'achron ain't a maskir. But when it comes to Pesach, so then the first one is maskir, meaning we still continue saying Mashav Haruach through Shachris, but by Musaf we already stopped saying Mashav Haruach, and that's when it ends. We say Mashav Haruach from Sukkot or from Shmini Atzeres all the way to Pesach. Okay, let's see Rashi. Rashi tells us Matzkirin Gvuras Geshamim She'emer Mashav Haruach Hamorid HaGeshem. Gvuras Geshamim is a reference to Mashav Haruach Hamorid HaGeshem that we know. The Gemara first time I might call it Gevuras Geshamim. The Gemara is going to explain why we call it Gevuras Geshamim. Why don't we just say Geshamim? Why don't we say Kerach Geshamim? There could have been various versions of what we say. We say Mashav Racham or Geshem, which is referred to in Shas as Gevuras Geshamim. And so the Gemara is going to explain why we call it that way. What's the reason? Is because it comes down with a certain power. You should know that in terms of rains, there's different kinds of rains, right? There's matar, there's Yoira, there's Malkosh, there's different kinds of rains, different styles of rain. Later on in Taanit, different types of rains are called for at different times. Since the Rashi Simakol B'Chag, it's a bad sign to have rain on the Sukkahs, like the Gemara tells us in Sukkah, Parakayashim, Yemasam Mutalafanis. Mishatisra Hamakefa, Marshal Evish, Balim Zekers, the Rabbi Shafak, like Kitan Alpana, Vamala, Yafshi Shimu Shecha. When rain pours down on a sukkah, everyone leaves. Like Hashem doesn't really want them in the sukkah. He doesn't want them like being in the sukkah and doing, the meals and all the like. He doesn't want them. He's not interested. It's like a master who doesn't want the servant to be mishtamish and give him the cup of water. Why are you going to start saying Mashav Aruch? It's like you're davening for rain on Sukkot. That's so against everything that we understand about the Yantav of Sukkot, that there's rain. It's a Simon Klala, right? The first night we try very hard to keep on staying in the Sukkah till we give it every shot. But why would he start saying it then on Sukkot? So Rabbi Lezer responded and said, "Lo yamarti lisha." I didn't say you have to ask for rain. She spell al gesham b'chag. He going to saying talamach. I didn't say you should daven saying talamach. Allah haskir shemaskir haskir chag gevurus shel mokim shemer yisham. I'm just saying that you should mention the power of the Rebbeinu Shalom that he says that he has the ability to bring down the rain. But Ainasai, right in its proper time, says Rabbi Lezer, it's the right proper time to do it then. Klamar bismanai. So again, Rabbi Shua's question is, so then why are you stopping to mentioning it then at the time of Pesach? Isn't it always the right time to talk about Hashem's power that He has the ability to bring the rain? You always talk about Tchias Mason. You always talk about Refa Chaylim. So why always talk about He has the ability to bring the rain? So the answer is okay. Look, at the end of the day, inshallah, it's like Hashem El Samach like Hashem. So you do it around the time for the rain. Fine. One of the things we're going to have to answer through Masechus Taanit is, it may be true in Israel, right? It may be true that the rainy season is really from Sukkot to Pesach. But in Spain, right, we're going to have to do this Shuv of the Rush. We've talked about it a little bit. We're going to have to do in more detail. The Rush wants to say we're saying Talmud all year round because it's always needing rain. And there's a growing season in the summer and in the spring. It's not just in this Sukkot to Pesach time. That's one of the things we're going to have to understand. Eretz Yisrael, Bavel, the rest of the world, that is going to be a fundamental topic in Okay, so Taisus tells us so the Taisus is referencing here the fact that on Shmini Atzeres, the Shmini the lo yasrim the sukkah, right? By on Shmini Atzeres, you don't sit in the sukkah. Even nowadays, we're not saying that nowadays everyone sits in a sukkah, but in theory, at least in the times of the Talmud, everyone was sitting in the sukkah on Shmini Atzeres. Why? Right, even during the times when those who are sitting in the sukkah on Shmini Atzeres, it's only doing it for rabbinic reasons. No one thinks that it's actually legit. That you have to. Why Mishum Sfeika of Africa the beginning of the Arch, even though we don't have any real suffix about the calendar, we know exactly when Shmini Atzeres is. We have a calendar that was set up. So Shemiyach Kulai, we still keep on doing it. We're actions, right? We still keep on sitting in the sukkah, even though we know exactly that it's not sukkahs anymore. Why? Because maybe we're going to lose our calendar. Like the Gemara tells us in the beginning of Bayah. So therefore, Taisus is opening up by noting that whatever sitting in a sukkah we're doing on Shmini Atzeres, that is not with any substantive value. Our sitting in the sukkah today is irrelevant because of trying to make a suffix. There's no suffix anymore. We're sitting in the sukkah today. Why? Because meaning of a sin biyadenu, or because of the fact that we're afraid that one day we'll lose the calendar. But inherently, there's no need to sit in a sukkah anymore on Shmini Atzeres. Period. That said, so you might have thought, 1 second, why are you saying Mashav Ruach on Shmini Atzeres? You're still sitting in a sukkah. Because that's not a real sitting in a sukkah. Don't worry about that sitting in a sukkah. That sitting in a sukkah is okay. Fine. So then Taisus, let's skip into the next Taisus. Taisus oh no, yeah, Im Kain. Im Kain says Taisus. Im Kain ata maskir and afal pish ein shaylin. If you say that you have to say Mashav Ruach even though you're not asking for rain, why Mashav Ruach? Because you're supposed to say it in the right times. So then Apakait says Skiru. So Rabbi Shua is asking Rabbi Lezer, so why not mention in the summer? Mata Nesan Simon Miyanta Farisha, and what are you saying from Sukkot to Pesach? What's the reason for that? I mean, after all, at the end of the day, it's always the right time to talk about Hashem's powers and His abilities. Says the Gemara. Says Rabbi Lezer, Emor b'Brisa b'Gemara Kol HaKayitz in Bala Haskim Maskir. Lezer himself holds in a brisa that if it's in the middle of the summer, a person wanted to mention Mashav Ruach, you could also say it then. Why? Because the La'ilam b'Ayin Nasem Mashim, right? It's always like the whole year round, in theory, is appropriate. Miu ad Hashalei Rami Lechayva, but there's no actual obligation, right? Except for the period from Sukkot to Pesach. Al b'Yontav Rishon Chayva l'Ratzis L'fnei She'ela, right? But on Yontav Rishon, why are so you might want to point out says Tosis the Yontif Rishon is a chayva l'ratzis. Then you have a chayva to start being meratzis the Rebbeinu and saying what incredible powers he has. Lifnei she'ela before you end up what davening for the rain. First start being meratzis the Rebbeinu Shalom. Because before you ask Hashem for something, what you're gonna do the moment Sukkot is over, you're gonna start asking for the rain. So first you have to start being meratzis the Rebbeinu Shalom, and therefore start now. The beginning of Sukkot, because right after Sukkot you're going to be Maratza. Right afterwards you're going to start. You're going to want to be starting to ask. That's not exactly afterwards, right? Because we don't start saying Tal Matal Levracha until we do it until the time before. That's going to be a whole other topic here in Taanit. How we got to that date. That date is a very interesting calculation of how we actually get to it. But you're always supposed to start being Maratza before you're Mevakesh. What does that remind us of? That reminds us of the Gemara Brachas. Right? The Gemara Brachas tells us on Lamed Beis. That's how we practically daven the three brachas that we say before we start saying Atachanin. Well, first we maratz the Rebbeinu Shalom. How we maratz by saying all the incredible things that Kadosh Baruch Hu is the Koinei Hakol, he's the Refi Cholim, he's the Matu Asurim, he's the superpower. And then we say Atachanin, right? Because we always have to be maratz before Mavakesh. That same style says Rebbe Lezer. Let's start doing it earlier. Say Mashav Ruach before we start davening for rain. Before we're shoel for Geshamim, let's be masker the Gevuras Geshamim. And Rabbi Shua is then going to be makbid, as Taisus concludes. Rabbi Shua is going to be makbid on Siman Klala because of the fact that rain is a Siman Klala on Sukkot. And Rabbi Lezer is not makbid. He's not makbid on that at all. But and in theory, according to Rabbi Lezer, you could say Mashav Ruach the whole year. But this is more of the proper time because it's going to be coming the raining season. Whereas Rabbi Shua is like, okay, I understand that you can say this the whole time, but Sukkot is specifically, we learned that rain on Sukkot is not a good sign. So best to avoid it. Fine. So Zok the Gemara. Tana hecha koydik tani me'emasai. So you should know this line. For those who learn brachas, it's literally the same exact first line that we had in Masechtas Brachas. Not saying these are my connections, but these are certainly an obvious one. There's a couple, right? So the Mishnah starts out with the Me'emasai. The Gemara's first question is exactly the same. There's one more on the page that, at least for me, is another connection, which we'll see in a second. So the Gemara says, so Tana hecha koydik tani me'emasai. What is the Tana going on? We said Me'emasai. We said Me'emasai. From when do you start saying the Gevuras Geshamim? So the Gemara is asking, what's he going on? Right, the same way we asked in brachas, like, what were you going on that you said Me'emasai? Like, where did that come from? And there we said it was from Shachbach Kumecha. So the Gemara over here also wants to know, you're making the assumption that you say Mashav Ruach. But where did you know about this from? Where did it come? So the Gemara, Tana Hasam Kodik. We're going to another Gemara. Diktani, because we learned it in Mishnah in where? In Brachas, the fifth parak. It's on the Laman Gimel there. So we learned over there that one maskir and Gevuras Geshamim Tchias HaMeisim. We learned in that Mishnah that you mentioned Mashav Ruach, where in Tchias HaMeisim, V'shoylin, and you say the same Talmud, where Berachas Hashanim, V'avdala B'chenin Adas. Remember the Mishnah there says the Machlekes. Not everybody says that. Rabbi Kiva says you have a special bracha for Chenin Adas. For Avdala. Uktani Me'emasai Maskirin Gevuras Geshamim. And that's what we're saying in our Mishnah now. When do you say this Gevuras Geshamim? The Mishnah in Brachas is telling us that you do mention Hashem's power to bring the rain. And now we're asking in Taanit, so Me'emasai, from when do you start doing it? Where do you do it? How did you do it? Like, where did this come about? But we know about the chiyuv to say Mashiv Arach already in Maseches Brachos, already from the Mishnah in the fifth parak. So that's the Gemara's answer. Says the Gemara, really? V'lisni hasam. Why did I wait to Maseches Taanit? Already in the middle of Mayed. Why not ask it over there in Brachos? V'lisni hasam. Ma'ishna d'shaf ge'ad hacha. Why did you wait until here? Right? Like who's following this connection in the middle of Tainus, now in the middle of Mayed, we're going to ask it. For us, we moved from Brachas to Tainus, so it makes sense. Oh yeah, but that's why we're asking. No, but for somebody who was studying Keseda, it makes no sense. You left all these Masechs in the middle. You did Shabbos, and you did Erev, and you did Rosh Hashanah, you did like why now in Tainus are we talking about Brachas? The more rejects that answer. We're not going to say that the reason we're asking the Emasai is because of the Mishnah and Brachas that talk about Mashav Ruch Marna Geshem. That's not a legitimate. It's true. It does talk about Mashav Ruch Marna Geshem and Brachas, but we didn't we were not like dying to ask the question, and we managed to finally ask in the middle of time, like to get in the middle of Mayt in the beginning of Tainus. That's not what it was. The Gemara rejects that because it doesn't have a reasonable explanation as to why you would have waited to the middle of Seder Mayt to be able to ask this question. Elos, we're saying differently. What instead are we going on? Why is it that we're saying Mamasai Maskir and Givisham? What gave us the incentive to try to talk about it again now? So what are we talking about? It's Elatana Rosh Hashanah. So we're talking really about Maseches Rosh Hashanah. Because in Maseches Rosh Hashanah, which is much closer to Tainus, it's in Seder Mayed. So what did we learn over there? The Taanit and the Mishnah told us over there in Rosh Hashanah. Right? Everyone knows that on Sukkot there's a judgment on water. There's judgments on all the different Yom Tovim, and Sukkot happens to be the judgment for water. So now, since we know that there's a judgment for water on Sukkot, so now that we know there is a judgment for water on Sukkot, so we're asking a kasha here in our Mishnah. So now that we know that there is a inyud of Mashiv Aruach, so we want to know, when do you start saying it? Now that we know that you judged on water on Sukkot, so now we want to know when do you mask this Gevuras Kisham? When do you say Mashiv Aruach? And the Gemara concludes with this. In other words, the Gemara is satisfied. This is a good explanation. To run to Brachas and say that that's a connection there, that's not a good connection. Rather, the connection is that in Rosh Hashanah, since it talked about the B'chag and that's our connection as to why it would work to segue here into Tainus and say, well, okay, so now that I know that there's a judgment of water, when do I start mentioning Mashiv Arach? And the answer is going to be a Machlais or Blazer B'Shul. Fine. We'll put a stop for a second and just look to see Rashi and Tosfos a little bit. So it says Rashi, I didn't mention yesterday, but it's one of the big misconceptions that everyone thinks that the Brachos has the most words of any Masechta. It's like not even close. Like Shabbos is way more. Chulin, like many Masechtas have way more words than the Brachos, but Brachos has the most words on any page. Brachos, and that's why it always is taking us long, right? Because the pages are chock full. These Agadah are just so massive. Right, Tainus, you have more time. Right, the Masechta that has the most words per page is definitely Brachos. Yeah, so it says Rashi, Tana Hechakai, right? Kloima says Rashi, Miziktani Me'emasai, and the fact that our Mishnah is saying Sanu from when do you say to Mashiv Aruach? Mechlal de Pshita le Lahai Tana the Chayav Mahaskir. That means it's perfect to the Tana that you have to say Mashiv Aruach. So where do we find that there's a chiyuv that you should be mentioning anything? Right, this was the thing I think I may have mentioned in the beginning of Brachas, right? In the book that shows them by Chaim Potok, that was the drush of Amos. Amos like Kernas Kriyash Shema ba'Haravin. What do you mean? From when do you say Kriyash Shema? From when you say Kriyash Shema in the night is presupposing that you have a chiyuv to say Shema in the first place. Right? And what I thought was like his big chiddush as a 10-year-old, I then later on saw that the Ravid number 1, right, Sefer HaKabbalah, says the same thing. Ba'mem Madlikin, that was another one of his proofs. Ba'mem Madlikin, right? Remember, we talked about this in our Sunday classes on the formation of the Teresh Baal Peh. Says the Ravid number 1, he's the maximalist. He's the first one of the maximalists from Provence, from that area. We said about the Ravid says, he talked about various different Mishnayos, that they're presupposing. Everyone knows there's a chiyuv to say Mashiv Ruach. Everyone knows there's a chiyuv to light candles on Shabbos. We don't have to prove it. The Gemara wants to, fine, the Gemara will spend time. But for the Mishnah, they're presupposing that everyone knew what you're talking about. Remember, in Lika, no one has to ask, oh, is there a chiyuv to light Shabbos candles? No. Me'emasai maskirin gvasham, or me'emasai karna shema ba'ravin. No one has to say, oh, well, there's such a thing called Shema. Everyone knows the Shema. Everyone knows that you say Shema. The only question is, when are you allowed to say it? And that was the argument, if you remember, of the Ravid, that all of the Mishnayos are debating what? Only small things. When do you say it, this, that, but not fundamental things. There's nothing fundamental that was a machlokes. That was fine. So the Gemara. I know we did a couple of Rashi's here, so let's just do this other one. So we said, right? That was a mechiv, an actual chiv they have to be masking versus geshamim. And the Tan is there for asking. So no, where do we see that there was such a chiyuv? Awesome. Kai is going on. One masking versus geshamim, a second brachas. Fine. The next one the Marshal takes out. Mashna the Shafi. Why did he wait? That's what we slugged up. The first reason for brachas. Listen, awesome. Why are you saying it? Why are you saying it in Seder Mayed? Me'emasai. Say it in brachas. And the Tani masking versus brachas. I don't say this royim. Like you don't have a good reason why you dropped it until now. So Rashi, we're not saying that it's going to be based upon the Mishnah and Brachas. Rather, we're talking about the Mishnah Rashon. The Holy Tana inside the Hasam Kai, the Tana Mershashana Solek, Shishneim Seder Echad Hain. We're going to be saying it's based upon Mesachas Rosh Hashanah, and therefore Lahachi Lemotzi Lemeimar Maishno the Shaf Gad Hacha. And that's why we're not asking why did he abandon it until here, because we're going on the same Seder of Mayim. Let's look at the Taisus of Hasam Kai. So you see Hasam Kai. Look at Rashi at the same time looking at Taisus. So Taisus Hasam Kai Pirish B'Seder Zerayim B'Brachas Hurricane Oimdim V'Lisni Hasam. Right, we're talking about the connection is from the Mishnah and Brachas. Klamar My Tana Hacha B'Mayid My Tani Hasam B'Seder Zerayim. Why not ask it over there in Mesachas Zerayim? Do you know something a bit weird about this Taisus? Right. It's very similar to what Rashi said, right? Look at the next one. Look next Taisus. Elatana Rosh Hashanah Kasolik Pirish. Rosh Hashanah have a Seder Mayid. Dim time Vakati listen to Seder Zerayim. So why not say it still in Seder Zerayim? Yeshem the Hacha Iker. The Amr V'Chaim Dan Elamayim. V'Orcha the Milsa the Ratzis Lefnei She'ela. And it's a normal thing to be Maratz the Rebbeinu Shalom before you daven. Taisus Lu just had the same idea. In the Taisus of Imkain, the same fundamental idea. You first have to be matzah before you ask. And we're going to see this again and again in Mesachas Taanit. The Taisus is going to be Mefarish the Gemara, and you're going to see the same things in Rashi. So I want to jump now to the back for a second, talk about a fundamental Maratzias in this Masechta that you have to know. And the Maratzias says as follows. It says Maratzias, a big Maratzias there. It says, the Marti looked at Ezer Rai, Slama Shechlitu, the Rashi, Latanis, and Rashi Zal. So I want to just explain to you that Rashi in Mesechus Taanit is not Rashi, right? So we don't have no Rishba, we don't have the Rashba in Taanit, we don't have Rashi in Taanit. This Rashi, well, we do get Rabbeinu Gershom, which we didn't have in Brachas. So the Maritzkis is explaining why is it that I know. He says that Rashi in Mesechus Taanit is not Rashi. So he tells you, meaning it's from the students of Rashi, from the school of Rashi, but it's not Rashi himself. How do I know? He says number one. Because Mishun ben Pirish Rashi, the Pirusha B'Shar Masechtas. A very big difference between Rashi here and Rashi and other Masechtas. Number one, Ba'arichas HaLashon. Rashi is much more verbose in Masechtas Taanit. Two, he quotes the Talmud Yerushalmi, and you never find Rashi quoting the Yerushalmi as much as you find here in Taanit. Next, you don't find that Taisus has this Pirish because they keep on explaining throughout Masechtas Taanit things that are Pasha Pshat and things that we find in the Rashi. And if he had access to Rashi, the Balei Taisus wouldn't have been saying over the same things. Beis says, "Lo helef ne Balei Taisus." Pirish said, "The Hari Mitchilas Mesechus that Tzeifa, Rino the Taisus Bo Lasses Pirushal Divri Gemara." This whole Taisus is very different than the rest of Shas. Taisus is explaining the Gemara in this Masechta more than any other Masechta. Usually Taisus is not doing a Pirish. Sometimes he does a rear here and there, but it's usually trying to bring other Gemaras and questions as to how you understand. But here in this Masechta, Taisus is a Mefarish, and a lot of times you'll find these Pirushim in what we call Rashi. That's a clear proof that it wasn't Rashi and that he didn't have, and that the Balei Taisus didn't have access to it. And Mishum Mishara is different than other types of Torah. But Rak Lahakshish, Lafarik, Lafalpa, Binin Halacha. The Torah is usually asking and answering and trying to understand the practical halacha. The Kama Sechah says the Torah up here. Rev Hemli Avay Rak Lasses Pirshal Divrei Shas. Most of the Torah in Taanit is coming just to explain the Gemara. That's most of the Pirushim in Meseches Taanit. Continues on the Maritzchias. The Daimon Ladiver Rashi, and they're very similar to Rashi. Lupa'am Haim Ice Ba'is Daimon Leperish Rashi. Sometimes they're literally word for word what Rashi says. Mashlam Tzam Shemak, we never find this anywhere else. Adrinu Kan Rashi, the Perish Tainus, maybe in Yom Harbi Hashem Midrashis. Rashi in Pesach Tainus brings down tons of Midrashim in a way that it doesn't do in other places in Shas. More than that, Rashi in Pesach Tainus says Amarli Rebbe in a way that you don't find throughout Shas. He always is quoting his Rebbe. So, and he keeps going with more and more of these proofs. But basically, the takeaway is that if you are going to go through now Maseches Taanit with Hashem, and you're going to see Taisus and often saying the same thing as Rashi, don't be wondering. It's because this comes from the school of Rashi, but not Rashi himself. And the Baal Taisus that was used when they put together the Taisus did not have, when they were writing these Taisus, did not have access to this Rashi, and so therefore they were trying to explain also the Gemara and help you out because of the fact that they thought that you didn't have access to a parish. Okay, is that the Gemara? Or no? Do we have? Do we miss the Taisus over here? So the Gemara, yeah. So no, we're up to the Gemara now. The Gemara says like this. So so we said we went from Roshana to Tana Roshana Kasol, Tana B'chaim, then Almayim, Adi Tana B'chaim, then Almayim, Tana Me'emes HaMatzkin Gvurus Kasham. Fine. So now we're up to like a bit of a new Gemara. So we've already satisfied why we said Me'emasai. It's gone from Rosh Hashanah. Now we have another question. The listening Me'emasai Maskun Al Hagisham and My Gevurus Kasham. The Gemara wants to know why we use the lashon of Gevurus Kasham. Whenever we talk about Mashav Rach, it's always Gevurus Kasham. Why not say Geshamim? Because rain comes down with power. Right? We say Nisim Neflos Ane Mispar. The genius of the Rebbeinu Shalom is he does unbelievable wonders. It's beyond any imagination. Hashem sends the rain, right? This is also there by Eiv. Hashem sends the rain on the land, and he sends the water on the fields. So the more wants to know, my mashma, what's the connection? I'm not really understanding. You're telling me that the reason we have to call Mashav Arach, you have to call it Gevuras Geshamim, is because Hashem's genius is beyond, and He brings rain. Okay, how does that tell me that I have to call it Gevuras Geshamim? My mashma. You have to bring down like a sort of a Gezer Shava of Cheker. Here it said. By it says and we see we're talking about rain. It's part of the genius and the unbelievable miracles of the Rebbeinu Shalom. We have another place where it talks about Cheker, where it talks about that in the context of Hashem creating the world in Yeshaya. Hashem creates. Did you not hear? Did you not know that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the God of the universe, He creates the corners of the world, the corners of the universe. Lo Yafalei guy doesn't get any tired. There's no ability to comprehend His genius, and the very next words in the next pasuk are right, and He gives to the weak strength. So you see Hashem's unbelievable powers. And you see Hashem prepares the mountains with His strength, girds them with strength. So you see Gevura, you see by the creation of the world, and you see, therefore, since it's talking about rain, in the context of Cheker, and we talk about the power of the Rebbeinu Shalom to be able to create the universe, to bring the rain, so that's how we get to Gevuras Geshamim. So again, Rabbi Bar Shila is coming to explain it. Rabbi Yochanan said, Adin Cheker, V'neflois Adin Mispar, and now we want to connect that to creating the world itself, which is the pasuk in Yeshaya of Halo Yadata, and Lo Shemata. Hashem is Barik Tzeis Haaretz Lo Yafa Lo Yiga, Ein Cheker L'Sfunasai. So since we use the word Cheker by both, and since we have in that pasuk there in Yeshaya also mentions Kaichai, and we see Mechen Harim Bik Kaichai, and over there it says Givura, so therefore you get to know that's Givuras Hashem, that Hashem brings the rain with strength. Now, I have a question. I've always had the question. I don't have a good answer to it. It's a lot of psukim. to explain to me that the rain comes down hard. Open the window when there's a big thunderstorm, and I need to have 7 psukim that seem to be grasping at a straw to be able to tell me that the rain comes down hard. We can call it Gvuras Kasham because that's our own pashut. Sometimes the Gemara says, "Why do I need a pasuk?" Svari. I need a pasuk. It's mamash pashut. Open up the window, and you'll know. So I don't have a good answer as to why we want to go around running around for all these psukim to prove this point. I'm not sure. Another thing I wanted to mention is that if you notice, the man Amar that we're bringing down here, Rabbi Bar Shila, he's the first man that mentioned in Shas. And in Brachas, he's the first Amira, I pointed out there. In Taanit, he's only the second. But he is the first one coming to explain Rabbi Yochanan. So we have to just keep him in mind that somehow he's managed to, he's from the later Amiran, somehow he's managed to always be, right, in Brachas and in Taanit, right there at the beginning of the Masechta. So it's certain supposed to be able, because who finishes the whole Masechta. But you got the first Amid, Rabbi Bar Shila. Yeah. Okay. All right, so let's see Tosfos. So Tosfos points out over here, we're listening, Me'emasai Maskirin Geshamim, my Gvuras Geshamim, Rabbi Yochanan Sheyardim Megvura. Rabbi Yochanan said that the reason we call it Gvuras Geshamim is because it comes down with Gvura. And I'm asking, we could have just stopped it over there and say period. Well, I don't have to bring down Psukim to prove that it comes down with Gvura. So I don't have a good answer to that one. But Tosfos asks, Tosfos says, I don't understand. Hasan b'brachas in Paragim Namdu, when we talked about the halacha, they have to be mentioning Masha Baruch in the middle of Shemana Esrei. So might like a makshir k'may hacha. V'listim askirin ala gesham, my givurus geshamim. Over there we said givurus geshamim in the Mishnah, the 5th Paragim Brachas, and the Gemara didn't feel the need to ask why do we call it givurus geshamim. So why are we asking it here? Shlomo says, Tosfos answers, Shani hacha da the ikar sheidish al geshamim. Tosfos no. Look, at the end of the day, that's Mesachas Brachos. It's done for other inyanim. Fundamental focus wasn't on the Geshem. Mesachas Taanit, it's a fundamental focus. That's what Tosfos is waiting to talk about. Tosfos says the Gemara is waiting to ask why Gvuras Geshamim only here in Taanit and wouldn't ask this in Brachos. Good. Okay. Says Tosfos. This is talking about the creation of the world. The same way that by the pasuk of Mechen Har Mekirchen, Neza Begvura is talking about Brias Olam. So too, we can then connect the Koiche to Koiche and Yeshaya. And that gets us, since Koiche is mentioned with Gvuras by Mechen Har and Bekoiche and Ezra Begvura, since we have in the pasuk in Yeshaya, which says Halei Data, Halei Shematim, which doesn't actually mention Koiche and Agamor, you have to go to the Bach. The Bach brings in the end of the pasuk, which is really the next pasuk, which says Noisnei of Koich. So now you have Koiche and Koiche, and then that last Koiche has Gvura. And now you could bring, since in the other pasuk which says Koiche also says Chayker, and since the other pasuk says Chayker, so now you've got the connection between Chayker, and you've got Gevura. That's how rain comes down with Gevura. That's essentially, in short, what the Gemara ends up saying. So Tosfos asks, okay, fine. Tosfos is accepting that this is, understandable about why we needed this to explain that the rain comes down strong. But Tosfos, I can still ask, I might not get Gevuras. I mean, Gevuras was like literally random in that pasuk. So call Koich Gesham. There, at least you have something a little better. I listen, Gedoles Geshamim, something else. Like the Gevura was like mamash at the grasping at a straw. So Tosfos answers, V'yishlama demin hadin nokat Gevuras b'shem time with Ika Koich V'ika Gedola. Inam b'shem dabracha maschelas b'Gevura lahakin nokat Gevuras. I prefer this last part of Tosfos. Is because if you look at the what we're saying over there in the thing, Ata Gibar Hashem. So we're talking about Gevura. That it makes sense then to refer to this idea of Geshem as part of Gevura's Geshem because that whole area that we're trying to talk about the strength of the Rebbeinu Shalom. Ata Gibar Hashem. We give all the examples. One of the examples is Geshem. So that's Nichlal into Gevura. That's how I sort of keep it. Okay. Continues the Gemara. So the Gemara says as follows. Now we've proven we have an answer as to why over here we're saying Me'emasai. We understand why it calls the Gevuras Geshamim. And now we want to know, fine, I understand HaKadosh Baruch Hu is very powerful, he brings the rain. I understand that we have to mention that. All that is good. I just understand we should mention before starting. We have to miratz the Rebbeinu before Mavakish. I understand all that. But for the Gemara, Ominal and the Bitzvila, but what do I have to do during davening? Why not like say it in the middle of the day? You know, like the Maram, right? The Maram Rothenberg, right? Everybody's saying Mashiach Baruch Marageshim 100 times on Simchas Torah. I want to make sure that they don't forget. Okay, so say it during the day. Why do you have to say it, Mamish, during davening? The Tanya, because we have a bride that tells us Lavas, Hashem like Yechon love them Chalavavim. The Pasuk tells us in Shema, we say every day you have to love the Rebbeinu Shalom and you have to be serving him with Chalavav. Chamezu Avad Shebelev. Havi Yamazu Tefillah. What is Avad Shebelev? That's Tefillah. Uksiv Basir v'Nasati Matar Artzach Bita Yara Malkish. Right, and what does the pasuk say right after? It talks about the rain. So you see, they have to be over there. Rebbeinu Shalom. That's tefillah, and we say juxtaposing it that about the rain that Hashem gives the rain. And here, rather, they mentioned two different types of the rain, right? Yara and Malkish. So by definition, you see that you have to have tefillah connected to rain. So therefore, that's why you should mention the rain is during tefillah. There's three keys that Hashem has. That was never given over to a messenger. Key for the birthing woman, key for Tchias HaMesim, and the key for Geshem. Says the Gemara, really? So these three keys that are given, and how do I know? Like, where do I see that? So it's more like this. Right? The pasuk says that by Geshem, Hashem is going to open up the storehouses right in heavens. You see the word yiftach, right? The word yiftach, the Pesach, the key. What maftecha shalchai? What's the key by the birthing woman? Nine the sivi iskar lakim esrachel vayishma. Turn the page to base on the base. El vayishma lakim vayiftach esrachma. Hashem opens up Rachel's womb. So that's another key. You see the word again. Yiftach is used over here as well. What's the maftech shel Tchias HaMesim? Minayin the sivi datin ki ani Hashem bepisches kiversem. Hashem is going to open up their graves. In other words, using the word Pesach, the key, with the graves. So that's for Tchias HaMesim. B'marava. In Eretz Yisrael, they used to say, Amri af maftech shel parnasa. So in the land of Rabbi Yochanan, they used to say that there was another key, the key for parnasa. It said, Rabbi Yochanan, my time like a chashav law. Why does Rabbi Yochanan mention that there's a key also for parnasa? What are you talking about? Gisham is parnasa. I don't need to mention it. By definition, that is going to be one of the keys here. And that's why the Raks to mention, right, they're paying a lot of money to be able to go do, right, the Psicha for Geshem. That's what we call it, Psicha for Geshem, yeah? Okay. It says Taisviz. That's not the reason we call it, but I'm just saying another reason, yeah? Okay. It says Taisviz, Sholosh Maftechais. Taisviz says, what do you mean, the three keys Shalai Nimsu? What are you talking about, Frektais? We know that the key of Geshem was given to Eliyahu, right? He says, you're not going to get it. He says to Achav, no rain unless I say so. So Taisa says that what the Gemara means, Shalai Nimser, doesn't mean ever. That it was never given. It was given sometimes to people, but it was never given forever. So Eliyahu has the key for rain for a bit, fine, but he doesn't have the key forever. He only has the key for a bit of time. And the last Taisa, Vayishmael Elakim Vayiftach Esrachma, says Taisa, perish, Shehu Ba'atzma, meaning Hashem on his own. Right? Hashem keeps the keys. He himself opens up her womb. Hashem opens up the storehouses. Rabbi Yosef Klezama, so Tessa asks a question. 1 second, you see that there's other keys for anger. So the Gemara says that Hashem it has the three keys. These are the three keys of bracha. So yes, there's other keys for negative things, but that we're not including over here. And Taisus points out that there's another question at the end of Taisus is that there's a Gemara in Psachim that talks about York Meisar Shal Barid, that there's a side that seems to have the key for Barid. So Taisus says So Taisus says, and essentially for negative keys, yes, some are given away, some are kept by Hashem, whatever, but that's not our point here. Our point here, when we talk about the three keys, the only keys of Racham, keys for the good. All right, we'll stop there.